All right, if you're staying for class, have a seat. And all right, I promise that we'll have the opportunity to plenty of time to get home in time to watch the debates. And for those interested in watching the debates, and so it's 7:46, and I'm thinking 8:30-ish that that will be done. So I just want to see if anybody is watching. Nobody is watching yet, and okay. So we're all set here. It's working with YouTube, so there's no problem. So what I wanted to talk about this evening is just kind of expand on my Kol Nidre sermon to say, first of all, that because of our tax status as a religious nonprofit organization, we are not allowed to have candidate signs on our property. We're not allowed to promote one candidate or say disparaging things about a candidate. If we were to have a candidates forum before the election to kind of sponsor a debate, we're not allowed to have just one candidate here. We would have to have all the candidates here. So that's just part of our tax status. So that, what? But
if we went over to your house and just you happened to
I could, if you came over to my house because the rabbi invited the congregation to his house, I would not be allowed to promote or disparage a candidate. I could not host a parlor meeting for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump in my house, or any local, as a rabbi. I own my house. It's mine. Some rabbis live in houses that are owned by the synagogue. So that absolutely, no, I could have a sign on my lawn, but I don't do that because I'm just not interested in having signs on my lawn. But also, I just don't think it's appropriate for me to have a position like that. I can talk about policy issues related to the American government, any government, but I can't talk about a candidate only and be promoting that one candidate, asking people to vote for that candidate. Now, there was a Washington Board of Rabbis meeting the beginning of September talking about how do we talk about the elections for over the high holidays, right? Because how do you avoid the elephant in the room on the high holidays? Because, though I like to talk about Jewish things and make Jewish things relevant to people who are coming to synagogue on the high holidays, I also know that I have to talk about current events in a Jewish way. So how do we do that? So there were a couple of people who said, this election is so glaringly terrible and so racist in content, and one candidate specifically is really, really over the edge, that it's appropriate for a rabbi to point that out about that particular candidate. And others are saying, no, absolutely not. You can't do that because you'd be risking. Now, as somebody else said, who's a lawyer before he became a rabbi, and he was a tax attorney, said tax attorneys, the IRS does not send out the police.
Right.
They don't have a police force that goes around to synagogues and churches to see if they are following through. So theoretically, I could say whatever I want, but if word got back to the IRS, and the IRS could prove that I had gone against then we could lose our 501c3 nonprofit status, and there goes the whole enterprise. Because why would anybody want to make a donation to the synagogue when you can't make a donation anymore, right? So that's the issue. So then, obviously, there are issues related to to the election cycle that I obviously spoke about. So I put it in the context of this question that was asked at a CNN-sponsored town hall meeting back in February in New Hampshire. So right around the time of the New Hampshire primary, CNN hosted this town hall meeting with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And so it was in Nashua, and there's a conservative synagogue in Nashua. I'm familiar with Nashua because I lived in Lowell for 5 years, and my two oldest kids were born in Nashua. So they're not like there aren't hospitals in Lowell. There are 3 hospitals in Lowell, but it just so happened that Lenore's OBGYN was a Jewish doctor. It was a husband and wife team from Nashua. So only 15 minutes away. So just up Route 3, if you know the area, just up Route 3, just past the Pheasant Lane Mall, I think it is, or Pheasant Run Mall, something like that. Then there's the Nashua, the kids were born at Nashua Memorial. And yeah, so anyway, so we have good association with Nashua. The kids are born in New Hampshire, so so the rabbi of that conservative synagogue in Nashua, Temple Beth Abraham, that rabbi was called on to ask a question at the town hall meeting. So that's unusual that you get a clergyman to be called on to ask a question. And what he asked was a religious question, which you would expect the rabbi to ask. But it was, as I said in my sermon, it was something that I was familiar with just because our former machzor, I always read from it before Mincha. Now, not too many people are there at Mincha and Yom Kippur, but I always read that after the silent Amida, the statement by the Hasidic rabbi Simcha Bunim that we should have 2 statements in our pockets. One statement in one pocket says, I am but dust and ashes. And in the other pocket, a statement, for me, the world was created. So you have these 2 polar opposite positions, and so we're always supposed to be mindful of situations that we're in. So if we're in a situation where things start going to our head and we're feeling good about ourselves, and that we think, oh, aren't we like God's gift to humanity? Pull out the other one. No, you're dust and ashes. But if you're in the opposite situation, you're feeling depressed, been a bad day, pull out this statement from the other pocket, for me the world was created, that's supposed to be a pick-me-up. So that's the idea. We're supposed to find the balance between the two. So the idea of finding the balance is a Jewish idea. It's a Greek idea too. Aristotle talked about the golden mean, but Maimonides made it a Jewish concept as well. This whole idea of finding the right path. You don't want to lean too far to one extreme or to the other. You want to be right down in the middle of the road to be well balanced and be able to be open to both sides and to appreciate both sides. But Hasidic rabbis and others, more religious people, would tend to the I am but dust and ashes pocket because we're ultimately, all of us are supposed to be humble. All right, so the idea is the point of a religious life is just the fact that religious life engenders community already makes it that we are supposed to be humble. We're supposed to give up part of ourselves to be part of the community. Because if the goal was to be hedonistic or narcissistic, you're not part of a community unless the community is there to do something for you. If you're getting something out of being part of the community, you belong to a country club not because you want to socialize with other people, but they have the best pool or the best restaurant. That for those reasons, that's not religious. That the idea of religion is to be humble, recognize that we're part of a greater system, and that we are just one link in this long chain that came before us and will come after us. So that sense of humility. So that was the question That was the background to Rabbi Jonathan Spira Savitz's question to Hillary Clinton alone about these two pockets, and asking Secretary Clinton, how does she deal with her ego? And it wasn't just about Hillary Clinton. Any political candidate has an ego. You have to have an ego to run for office, to think so high of yourself that you would think that people want to vote for you and that you have something to contribute to society. So there's an ego involved, even though the candidates always make it seem as if they don't have an ego. They all have to have some kind of ego in order to run for office. How do you deal with the ego with being humble at the same time? So Clinton, instead of just poo-pooing the answer or just giving some pat 1 second response, took 5 minutes to respond to this. You can Google this. Google Rabbi Nashua Hillary Clinton, and then you'll see the YouTube clip that will come up of her response to the rabbi's question. So it was quite, again, politics. The younger we are, the more naive we are, that we actually take politicians for at their word, and that they are actually going to follow through on the platform that they are talking about. So even though politicians sound good on the campaign trail, they rile up the crowds, and Bernie Sanders had this whole. Was Bernie Sanders, had he been nominated, would he been able to accomplish anything? I'm not disparaging Bernie Sanders. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that candidates who inspire people to vote for them don't necessarily always follow through on their promises. Okay, so I'm just saying, so the older we get, the more practical and more realistic we are about these candidates. So I understand that Hillary's response was still a political response, but she shared a couple of personal things that she didn't need to share. So she kind of revealed something about herself that made her believable in her response, and saying that this is a constant battle for her, how she strives to always seek gratitude in her life. So she didn't say seek humility, but being grateful every day for the blessings every day. And she did say in her response as well that she has a spiritual advisor. She says that she was brought up Methodist and part of her church outside of Chicago, and that she still is a faith-based person today. And she has someone who sends her something every morning, a verse or a thought to think about for the day. So how much time she spends with that doesn't matter. The fact that she shared that, that's interesting. And I think that leads to the bigger question. So as I said in my sermon, I was quoting all this not because I was supporting Hillary Clinton, but just because it opened up the conversation about what politicians should be thinking, what we want politicians to be thinking about and debating over and deliberating over as they prepare to lead the country. And more so, what are leadership qualities that we look for in people that we vote for? So that's really the bigger question. So I compared, I quoted a prayer that we say in the Amida, the weekday service, 3 times a day. And we just said it this evening a few minutes ago. We ask God to restore the judges as in the days of old. And I translated it leaders. Now, it's possible that the context of that prayer is talking about legal advisors and just the nature of courts and the trouble Jews have been in legally as a minority in empires throughout history. But I was more broad in saying that it's talking about leadership and restore our leaders as in days of old. And if that's the case, what leader do the rabbis want us to think about if not Moses? So Moses, as the quintessential leader, I think had 3 qualities. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in a Jerusalem Post article, which he wrote 4 years ago. It's called 7 Principles of Jewish Leadership. So if you look up that online, you'll see that he has 7 principles that he thinks Moses teaches us. So the first one we agree on. I can say that, oh, I thought the same thing that Rabbi Sachs thought, without having read his article first before I gave that sermon. He calls it responsibility. I called it action. So the idea that a leader has to take action for things that the leader sees as going on in society. In other words, what makes a good leader is someone who responds to a situation in a positive way and is forceful in that response. So the idea is that about Moses killing the Egyptian taskmaster. Moses saw in Egypt, long before he became leader of the people, he sees a Hebrew slave being beaten by this Egyptian taskmaster. And Moses, instead of thinking about it, what is he going to do? He immediately attacks the taskmaster and kills him. And the next day sees 2 Hebrews fighting, and one of them says, what, are you going to kill me like you killed the taskmaster the other day? And Moses knew he needed to get out of Egypt pretty quick to save his life. But he acted maybe without thinking. Now, I wouldn't say that a leader should act spontaneously. So that's why I think the action goes with responsibility, as Rabbi Sachs would call it, responding to what's going on around in society in a responsible way, in a forceful way, in a leadership way. That's one idea. Another idea is what we look for in a leader. This is what Rabbi Sachs is suggesting. What we should be thinking of when we're looking for a leader. So someone who takes decisive action, someone, in other words, not just speaking and talking a good talk, but also acting on it. A leader should recognize that they can't lead alone. That obviously it's not just about not being a dictator, but someone who can work well in partnership with other people. So our model is from the Bible of king, prophet, and high priest. We're all supposed to work together in concert, all for the same goal of bettering Israelite society back in that time. So you needed the king to provide the political leadership, the prophet to provide some spiritual leadership, and the high priest to provide the worship leadership, the education and the transmission of the Bible down to the people. So the 3 are supposed to work together. It rarely, if ever, in the history of our people, as the Bible records it, worked well together. The prophets were always at odds with the kings. Kings were always at odds with the high priests. So we have that, for example, when King David is about to die, there was a fight among his sons as to who was going to take over. So the obvious choice would have been the firstborn son, but the firstborn hardly ever takes over in the Bible. Bathsheba is pleading with David, saying, you promised that our son was going to be the next king. So David said, yes, Solomon would. So the firstborn son, I forget his name, had a priest on his side and was already anointed by that priest. And Solomon had a priest on his side and was getting anointed by that priest. So which one was going to be the priest as well? So there's a lot of corruption within the system, and that's just one example of many that the Bible tells us of how the system was corrupt and didn't work. But the idea is that the ideal is that these leaders are supposed to work together. Leaders, number 3, are supposed to be vision-driven. So in other words, they're not just going along based on things that are happening that day, but there's an agenda based on a vision of what the leader wants to accomplish, and that's what you have to work on. and that's what leaders are always supposed to be driving their work. Um, Leaders also learn. This is number 4. Leaders always study. So there's the example from the commandment in the Torah that every king is supposed to write a Torah. So not just writing a Torah scroll for himself, but also to be studying the Torah. So a king just doesn't assume, or a leader doesn't assume that they are always that they know everything, but they're always studying. And so Rabbi Sachs has the example of political leaders with huge libraries. So being an Englishman, he looks to Prime Minister Gladstone from the previous century, who had 30,000 volumes in his library and was known to have read at least 20,000 of them. And that Winston Churchill wrote 50 books in his lifetime and won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which I didn't know that he had. Apparently he did. Rabbi Sachs wouldn't lie. And David Ben Gurion, you go visit his house, has a huge library in his house. So it's just, not just, so Jewish leaders always study. Leaders always are supposed to believe in the people that they are leading. In other words, they're not leading for their own good. They're not leading because they want to have the power to lead and take advantage then of being a leader by amassing wealth or taking advantage of the citizens of the country. But it's an idea that the leader represents the best of all citizens of the country, and that the leader is always recognizing that the leader represents the country for which he or she is the leader, right? So just think about these in terms of the candidates right now here in America. But it's not just about that. It's about candidates in any country. What we want best in a leader, and as Americans, this is think about the American leadership. Who we want leaders who are responsible and are decisive and act. We want leaders who don't lead alone. We want leaders who are vision driven. We want leaders who learn and value study. We want leaders who believe in the people. And there are two other categories, two other ideas. Leadership is timing and pace. So this is where politics comes into it. Recognizing, kind of sensing what the mood of the electorate is, so that you can always stay in front, right? But not too far in front. You don't want to be so far in front that the people are left behind and that they can't see where the leader is going and don't believe in what the leader is doing. You want the leader to be in front and the people to have confidence in the leader's choices, but you don't want the leader to be too far in front, and you don't want the leader to be too much like blowing in the wind either, right? And the final thing is to understand that leadership is being a leader is stressful and emotionally demanding. So, and that to recognize that and be humble about that, and to understand that it's a tough job, and don't think that that any leader is going to be able to make it through without some kind of effect on him or her and their family. Just look at any president of the United States when they are elected for the first time, and then when they leave office, they look different. Right? You just look at President Obama. So all his hair was black. Now all his hair is gray. 8 years later. Yeah, okay. Gilda is pointing to me too. Yes, when I became rabbi 22 years ago, I had a near full head of hair, and it was all black. And look at me now. So yes, there are stresses to being a leader, which exhibit itself through hair and wrinkles and things like that. But also it takes a wear and tear on the body, and so leaders need to be sure that they are uh, you know, acting in a physically healthy way, exercising, etc., and also taking care of their families. So I think the Obamas are lucky in that his mother-in-law stayed in the White House with them the whole time to be able to be a support to his wife and to their children. And they were able to be successful to keep their girls out of the public eye as well. That's not always an easy thing to do. So, so lots of stresses to go with the job, and there was a fun, all the late night talk shows like to do these riffs on the politicians, and every now and then President Obama will agree to be on. So he was on Stephen Colbert the other night, and if you look on that on Facebook, you'll see a funny interview that Stephen Colbert did with Obama, like coaching him in a job interview how to look for your next job. So. Yeah, so just look for that, Stephen Colbert and President Obama. So that's kind of funny. So these are the thoughts that I had about this election. So it's kind of hard. No, even if we have these principles, if we were to think of other ideas that we're looking for in a president, even if it's just specific policies as well. We want the president to be pro-Israel. We want the president to be have a plan to help the poor and the disadvantaged in society, et cetera, et cetera. You want to have, it's our responsibility as the electorate to have this vision of what we think a leader should be. I'm presenting what Judaism has to say about what leaders should be, and that's the kind of leader that we need to vote for. We can't not vote. We need to vote for the best person that's out there. And that's what I would suggest to all of you, to whoever's watching, and for those of us in the room, to think very carefully about, maybe it's not so hard to make the choice, but we need to think hard about who these candidates are, what they represent, because after the election will be the tough part of bringing America back together again. There's some very, very divisive things that have happened as a result of this campaign, and also divisive things that are happening in America in terms of racial profiling, problem with with police and the African American community in America. These are major issues that we have. We have also abroad the problem with ISIS. We have refugee problem, Syria. Lots of things that have to be dealt with almost immediately. Major challenges that our next president are going to have to face, and we need to elect a president who we feel confident is going to be dealing with these issues in a way that we feel comfortable, in a way that we know will do America proud. So, any thoughts? Yeah.
So, back in the day of the kings, they didn't have a Congress to deal with.
Right.
I mean, they were essentially the dictator.
Yeah, well, so Julian is saying the king didn't have a Congress to deal with, and they were essentially a dictator. But that's not the case. The king had the Torah as a guide, and so at least that's according to the Torah. The future king, would have the Torah as the guide to how to be a king. So the book of Deuteronomy lays out in broad strokes what the king is allowed and not allowed to do. King is not allowed to amass wealth, not allowed to amass lots of wives and concubines, etc., etc. King is supposed to gather the people together once every 7 years and read the Torah to them publicly. So, and then Maimonides, well, the rabbis, and then the Maimonides expands upon that, and the end of Maimonides' summary of Jewish law, his 14-volume work, the very last section is kings, and it has all the laws related to how a king is supposed to govern. And so the idea is not just that that's history, but that's also the future, because the Messiah is going to be the next king of Israel. So to believe, to learn about how the king is supposed to act is also a sense of hopes and prayers for the future that there will be a future king of Israel. So the king is not acting alone. The king is not allowed to be a dictator. The king, so the major thing the king does is wage war. So the king cannot wage war unless the high priest, in consulting the Urim and the Tumim, which are these what seem like magic stones, these oracle stones that the Bible, that the Torah talks about, and that's on the logo of Yale University, Urim and Tumim. This sense of that you get to know the truth, how we're supposed to act by consulting the Urim and Tumim. So that's what the king had to do to determine if it was okay to wage war at this particular time. So the king could never act alone. King always is acting in consult with the prophet and with the high priest, so that no one is acting alone, apart, in a dictatorial fashion.
So they had to agree with him?
The king always had to look for advice from the prophet and the high priest, and assuming that the prophet and high priest are acting righteously and speaking righteously, then yes, the king would agree with their. So an example of this is Jeremiah. So Jeremiah preached that because of the actions of the people of Israel, the people were about to be conquered by Babylonia. And there is no reason to fight against the Babylonians. In fact, we're supposed to let the Babylonians conquer us. That's what Jeremiah preached, that it's too late. God has decided that Babylonia is going to be the tool for God's punishment of Israel. The king of Judah, because Israel was divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, Israel, was exiled to Assyria 200 years before. We have the southern kingdom of Judah. The king at the time said, "You're a crazy man, Jeremiah," and he put him in jail. And so he stayed in jail for quite some time until he was released, and Jeremiah kept talking the same thing. Jeremiah had to escape to Egypt for a while to escape the wrath of the king. There's an example of how the king would not accept what Jeremiah had to say. Now, how did the king know that Jeremiah was the prophet? Jeremiah not only was a bullfrog, but he was a prophet and had a huge book in the Bible. Absolutely. So he's one of the major prophets. In fact, you could argue the most important prophet in our tradition. He was the one who was alive during the Babylonian conquest of Israel and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And according to tradition, he's the one who wrote the book of Lamentations, the 5-chapter book, which is a poetic account of the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the destruction of the temple.
So if the king had listened to him, the temple not have been destroyed?
So that's it. So if the king had listened to Jeremiah, would things have been different? It's possibly that God would have seen, the king is actually listening to me now. The people of Israel actually listening to me now. Maybe I won't punish them so harshly. Maybe there'll be a shorter exile than a 70-year exile. It was only 70 years. In the scheme of things, technically speaking, we're still in exile. For religious people, we are still in exile today, almost 2,000 years after the Second Temple was destroyed. So 70 years is a drop in the bucket. Yes. So now, my point in saying why should the king have listened to Jeremiah is that there were other prophets around at the time too. So the problem is the prophets who we have books in the Bible are the famous ones. They are the ones whose word actually we know came true. Were other prophets preaching the same thing? Yes, but they might not have said it in as articulate or eloquent a way as those 15 prophets did. So there are 3 major prophets and 12 so-called minor prophets, minor only in size of book, not in stature. But there are plenty of other prophets around. Some of the other, like the books of Kings, talk about other, like Elijah and Elisha, don't have books, but they are prophets that had their run-ins with the kings as well. And there was a prophet school So you can actually, it's like going to rabbinical school. Not to compare rabbi to prophet, but it's the same, partly the same idea. The difference between a prophet and a rabbi is that the prophet can claim that God is speaking to them directly, and the prophets record how God has spoken to them. Rabbis don't say that God has spoken to them, but the result is that we're teaching the people about what we think how we think God wants us to behave. So the prophet is interpreting God's word for the people, just as the rabbis do. So that's the role of the prophet, but the prophet is also the advisor to the king.
Human nature wouldn't let most people just fold to the Babylonians.
True that human nature would not let most people fold to the Babylonians, but in the scheme of things, we know how history played out. And we know that this isn't just a story in the Bible. We can't prove that the exodus from Egypt occurred, but we can prove that the Babylonian exile occurred. That we know happened. And we know the Assyrian exile happened too. The king Sennacherib of Assyria, there are external sources to the Bible with his name on it, and which record him coming down to Israel and conquering Israel. So we know that these events happened. So the fact that the Bible, we are living that 2,500 years after, we know how things played out. So 2020 hindsight, yeah, the king of Judah at the time, I don't remember who the king of Judah was at the time of Jeremiah, should have listened to Jeremiah. So yes, that's a hard thing to do. Of course, what king what king worth his salt is going to say to people, we're not fighting the Babylonians, we're going to give in. So that was the struggle, the religious struggle. So, but you could play this out today too. How do presidents of the United States make their decisions? Who are the advisors that the president is trusting? So, and that's part of who we elect as well. I mean, we might like the particular candidate for their personality, but then we have to understand as well that there's going to be a whole team that the future president is going to select. So we have to understand that there's a particular positions that the president represents that are going to be constantly encouraged by their team. So, and then there's also congressmen and senators to elect too. So when you elect the president, you usually elect the same party for the Congress and the Senate so that they can all work together and create a long-term agenda. It's a great theory. Hasn't happened in a long time. And even when the same parties, the president and the party and the Congress don't always agree on an agenda as well. So it's a tough system. It's a wonder anything gets done in America. But that's what we always need to remember, the theory behind it, so that we're always pushing for this. So as religious people, we have to not just vote, but we have to advocate these positions as well and get involved in the community to ensure that things are done according to an agenda, a social action, and a religious agenda that is above the fray.
So if you're getting 5 or 10 emails a day asking for money, right?
From political campaigns?
Yes.
Fortunately, I don't get those emails. Unless they go into my junk, and I don't read my junk.
Because I actually have given money once.
Oh, yeah, you're on the list.
I'm on the list.
Right.
And totally get bombarded. And now I almost wanted to write back to him and say, listen, I'll lend you a little bit of money, but don't use it because you're so far ahead.
Oh,
and
no.
Just pay me back.
Right. It doesn't work that way. Right.
It's just kind of silly.
Yeah. So giving money to the candidates too. Yeah, it's a whole system that's not going to be fixed anytime soon. So we have to deal with candidates that are going to be the best that they can within the system, and have the potential to get things done. So, with that, I wish us luck and America luck, and that also on Facebook you'll see there's something else about Canadians wishing America all the best. America's a great country. We love America. So, and there's some hashtag with that for Twitter. I forget what it is, but say you love America or something like that. I don't do, well, yes, I do. I have a Twitter, I'm at Rabbi Jonah, and the only time I post anything on Twitter is if I've just made my video or if I've said that I've just, my class is starting. So I don't know. I'm not active with it. I'm just saying on Facebook with that video about it said at the end, the hashtag, if you want to submit, if you're a Canadian and want to submit your own video about how much you love America. So it's kind of funny.
Early voting starts a week from tomorrow.
Early voting in Maryland starts, right. That's right. So if you want to beat the crowds on November 8th, vote early.
It's kind of fun, though, to go on November 8th, though.
It is kind of fun to go on that day. And so, yes, it'll be an experience. So please exercise your right to vote. And good luck.
You're not going to vote on there?
Have a good evening, everybody.